So I've been wanting to talk about fear. Fear is the big thing, the big reason that everything came grinding to a halt for me recently. And as a result of that, I had to put the pause on everything and break a cycle that I'd come to the realization that I was caught in and had been caught in for quite some time. It was imperceptible at first, but over the last few years it just grew and grew until it took over the majority of my being. And was sabotaging everything I was attempting to do in my life. And fear is one of those things that can disguise itself as so many different things. And after coming to the realization that I had a real problem with fear, I developed a real problem with fear, and it was assassinating everything that I was trying to do within myself. I started looking at how am I going to overcome this, because it's become really debilitating. And I came across this acronym for fear, which is false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. Which is so true. I had to look at myself and go, okay, how many choices, how many decisions have you made based on evidence that exists in your mind in a perceived negative version of the future that you're casting out in front of you but doesn't actually exist in the present moment right now? How many choices and decisions haven't you made because of the same reason, remaining frozen, forecasting risk, the worst possible outcomes, and all manner of negative incarnations on what the future could possibly be, but without any basis in reality, so to speak. And if you're going to look forward and cast views on how the future is going to be, and if you're going to completely create those future realities out of thin air, why wouldn't you choose a positive one? Why wouldn't you choose confidence and faith in the future? Like, if the premise is it doesn't have to be real yet, because your fearful projections that you're constantly putting out in front of you don't have to be real yet in order to carry enough weight in the present moment to cause complete inertia or pull you out of your present moment, or pull you out of your momentum that you're trying to create to move forward on any path. If it doesn't have to be real, and it doesn't have to have happened yet in order for it to control your now, control your present moment, then why wouldn't you make it positive? Okay, the positive isn't real yet, but when you make decisions in the present based off fear and the negative, you only continue to experience fear and negativity in the future. So if you start to cast positive light over your choices, and I mean the power to start to do so can come in through the crack in the wall of that fear and in the facade of that fear, in as little as, well, my negative decisions didn't require any validity. They didn't require any reality. They hadn't happened yet. So if you can make your negative decisions that haven't happened yet, then you can make your positive decisions that haven't happened yet. There's no difference. They're two polarities on the same scale, neither of them requiring any reality to be true inside your mind. Your mind creates its realities constantly without any concrete reflections in the real world. It just tells you it is so. you know, I had a thought about faith the other day and how important faith is, and how faith always gets prescribed to, you know, religious connotations, religious circles, you know, religious doctrines. But faith, when I thought about it and I pulled out the religious aspect, sorry if that wind is loud. People often deride faith because it gets denoted to, faith gets ascribed as a way of people validating their religious beliefs to other people. You know, so, well, I know it's true because I have faith, and that can turn off other people when they hear about that. But if you disconnect faith from religion, to what faith is at its source, faith is just a form of positivity, and that's not a bad thing. Having faith in yourself, or having faith in the future, or just having faith in general, that things are as you feel they are, regardless of you needing external, concrete, material validation of that belief. Just a belief that things are going to be working out for the best. Faith that you can do it. Faith that you're good enough. Faith that you're always in the right place. Faith that everything's going to turn out for the best for you. Faith that only the best will happen. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't have to have anything to do with religious beliefs. And I've been starting to try and practice faith in this regard and turn around this negativity that's really taken hold of me, caused me to freeze up in my life. So let's just talk about, it's going to be a bit of a longer chat today, let's just talk about how much fear is a thing, is a presence. It's a strong vibration in this experience for everyone. We'll start with the external because we all know we're experiencing that. The internal can be a little bit more tricky. You don't always know what you're experiencing internally, depending on how much you look within. But in an external sense, fear is something that's promulgated and peddled and fabricated constantly into our experience through media and all manner of outlets. And it's a negative forecasting of how things are going to be and how things could be. It's a conscious choice to view the maybe, to view the might, to view the could be in a negative light, in a fearful fashion. Whether heavily or subtly, that affects most people. You know, the fear of each other, the fear of ourselves is put out there constantly through media and other channels. So let's look at it on a global stage. Well, as within, so without, as above, so below. So we're starting with the without, and then we're going to move back to the within. So let's go right out to the outer edges of the without and say, okay, globally, fear is constantly in play, promulgated by the media and fed by all those sources, that for starters, countries need to fear each other. We should fear each other. You know, we're stockpiling weapons because we can't trust the people on the other side of the ocean, on the other side of the border. They're a little bit different to us. Of course, they're not. Cultural differences are surface, they're skin deep. Really, we're all souls having an experience, but we're isolated and we're separated through fear. So there's fear on the global stage, fear of each other. We're stockpiling weapons. All these situations that you'll hear about on the news, sometimes they're coming from a place of something just happened in reality in the physical world, and we are going to react to that physically. But a lot of the time, I would say 90% of the time, it's we hear this is going to happen, and if this happens, we will react with this. If this happens, we will react with this. Just know that we have these sitting there in the bunker, and we're prepared to use them if this negative thing that we're forecasting into the future happens. Okay, so there's one example of fear on the outer extremities, and that gets fed into the, you know, into the broadcast that we all hear. So we've got this broadcast that reflects a general fear of each other. You need to be afraid of your fellow man. You need to be afraid of yourself. Coming back to your own national boundaries, you need to be afraid that somebody's going to break into your house. You need to be afraid that when you're passing someone on the street, they're going to take what you have. You can't trust anyone because someone you don't know might stab you, or might steal your kids, or might do something. Okay, so this general door locking, national, domestic fear channel, all right? On the external, on the without. So, as within, so without, as without, so within. So, is all this causing the fear that we're carrying inside us, some of us in a hidden sense, or maybe in part it contributes to that? But we'll go into the internal ways that we can all hide fear in a minute. And when you look at how easy it is to harbour fear and carry fear around like a virus or like a pathogen, it's constantly subconsciously directing your thoughts and actions, you can start to see how we've got to a place where there's so much fear on the without, because we're all carrying so much fear within. And this is what I discovered about myself recently. I was riddled with fear, just like someone who's found out they've got stage 4 cancer and had no idea. I found out I had stage 4 fear, and I was like, where did that come from? Where did it come from? What caused it? And more importantly, how am I going to get rid of it? Because it's debilitating. And anyone out there who's struggling with extreme anxiety or fear-based disease and stress, I have my full-blown sympathy, because I discovered for myself just recently how bad anxiety can be. It's a horrible way to live, and I see when I look online, there are just some people who are stuck with it constantly, endlessly, living with it. I've been living with it for years, and it is horrendous. I've struggled with depression different times in my life, but anxiety, when it gets out of control, is just so destructive and so hard to hold. So where was I? Carrying fear within. So doubt, worry, anxiety, terror. Terror is not something most of us physically experience, but let's start with, as I grew up, the cultural conditioning that I had towards fear, and why I think you come across so many people who go, I'm not afraid of anything. You know those people? I'm not afraid of anything. No, nothing scares me. I'd love to say that. There are plenty of reasons for that, but here's just a general one that I think has been prevalent. I mean, I grew up in a Western country, obviously, so perhaps more a prevalent part of that culture and society. But when you're living in a society where you don't have a physical source of threat and fear to be in fight or flight constantly, i.e. you're not worried about soldiers kicking your door in, or you're not worried about bombs falling where you live. Your only exposure to fear, and this is the exposure to fear that the majority of humankind is coming up with constantly, is fear that exists within your mind, fear that is promulgated from the outside. So for me, as a child growing up, I became conditioned to think about fear as terror, because the only place I saw fear, the only place I ever experienced fear, the only place I ever witnessed fear and visualized fear was, say, through films. And generally when fear is depicted in a film, it's depicted at the level of terror, or getting close to. And you start to think, well, I'm in a place where I never really have to experience this terror. There's never any boogeyman, there's never any, destructive enemy hell-bent on wiping me out. There's never any monster, there's never any alien threat. So, really, I'm safe. Fear is not something I have to deal with. But meanwhile, behind that constant conditioning and brainwashing while you're growing up, there's this reality that fear takes so many other forms, and these are the forms that really freeze you up and start to steal your momentum and choke you up as you grow in life and you leave them unaddressed. Doubt, worry, anxiety, okay, feeling like you're not good enough. These are all the common forms of fear that operate under the surface behind the majority of our thoughts and decisions that we make day to day, that cause us to have self-destructive habits, that cause us to make choices that aren't in our best interests. Something else I came across when I was looking for ways to try and work on my own fear was doubt is just faith in the wrong thing. I was like, that is so true. We just talked about faith before and what a good thing faith can be, but when we doubt ourselves, when we doubt our choices, when we doubt the positive result of any situation, we are having faith in the wrong outcome, the negative outcome. It's funny, the one thing we don't doubt is the doubt. It's so easy to just doubt and accept it as, yep, no, the worst will always happen, nothing good's ever going to come of anything. A lot of that comes from doubt that you're worthy, doubt that you're good enough, low self-esteem. Low self-esteem ends up in a fear of not being good enough. Kind of all roads lead back to the same place. So for me, quitting smoking recently, there was a fear leading up to that. There's a fear I wouldn't be able to do it because I've tried so many times and I haven't succeeded. But behind that habit was a fear that I was constantly suppressing. And it came to me while I was in the first few days of quitting, going through the withdrawals that I was going through. Came back to me the reason why I started. I started because I was 14, found out my father had developed bowel cancer, pretty serious, and it was at the early on. It was serious enough when they were trying to work out the extent of it as to will he or won't he survive? I was 14, I'd just finished school. And I remember back on that stage, a friend of mine had stayed over and they smoked. They'd left a packet of cigarettes out at the house. I remember feeling like I knew I was worried. I knew I had this fear. I knew deep down I was carrying some strong fear-based emotions around my father, potentially dying. I'm trying to compute that at 14 years of age when you just don't normally have to think about that stuff. But I didn't want to feel those strong emotions. I didn't want to exhibit those strong emotions. So I'm gonna have a cigarette, take my mind off it. But that was where it started. It literally started there for me, and it only came back to me recently. Excuse me. I was using it as a suppressant to suppress fear. Anyway, fast forward to now and why I've finally discovered that fear is such a prevalent force in my life, and it's a force that has been operating subconsciously from the background and literally slowly sabotaging my efforts more and more and more until it created complete inertia, complete lack of movement. Too afraid to make a choice in case it was the wrong one. And it started out with doubts along the way, which led to choices. Doubts, anxieties, worries. Let's just see if we can get us out of this wind. I'm worried it's going to be just too loud and you won't be able to hear anything. I'll have to do all this again. So, doubt, worry and anxiety. Sabotaging your choices. That's what got me to where I am. Making choices based out of false evidence that appeared real in the future that hadn't eventuated yet. Those choices were big, they affect your life. Selling your business, leaving an area that you've been in, leaving relationships, like big things. When I look back, starting this cycle of making these choices based off false evidence. And you can't grow if you're not pushing through fears. You can't grow. You can't grow stronger. If you're not pushing through fears, you're remaining in fears. If you're not employing positive thoughts that serve you, then fearful thoughts are controlling you. And every choice I made, especially over the last 4 years, was a reactive choice and a fearful choice based off false evidence that I had nothing in reality to corroborate. And every time you make a choice like that, you weaken your position. Every time you realize that you're in a weakened position, you make another choice that was twice as reactive as the one you made before, and slowly you end up in this weakening position where even things you have materially are getting peeled away, and you're getting yourself into a more and more difficult position. Before you know, you've gone from being really comfortable to being in the survival mode, which matters even more when you've got a family, when you've got other people relying on you. It carries a lot more weight for a man. So you get to the point where you're like, all right, I've been making reactive decision after reactive decision after reactive decision, and it's now brought us to the point where we have very little left. We don't have our own home. We're literally being put up by someone, and I'm about to make another decision, which I started because my last reactive decision, let's just go this way, it'll be less windy. My last reactive decision led us to a bad place, and I'm about to make another one. And I came to the realization, and again, I had fear paralyzing that choice as well. So you make the choices out of fear, and then you become afraid that you've made the wrong choice. So you end up in this like bouncing backwards and forwards, caught between two walls of fear. The walls get closer and closer together. The bouncing increases in speed. You move a shorter and shorter distance each way until you just end up frozen and in complete inertia. And you don't do anything. You don't make any movement. And once you're in that place, the lack of external movement becomes a whole lot of internal movement that starts happening inside your mind, bouncing left, right, up, down, in the form of anxiety, fearful thoughts, regrets about past decisions, fear about future choices. Before you know it, you're experiencing insomnia, and you've developed a full-blown anxiety problem, which is me recently, not so long ago. It's something I'd never experienced before. Panic attacks, something I'd never experienced before, and before you know it, I was going to the doctors to get medication, which is, for me, something I never do. Not because I'm like, I don't need, it's more that I prefer to develop tools, and you can't cure a problem at its source with pills. Pills are a band-aid, But anyway, I found myself at the doctor's getting anti-anxiety medication, which did help in the interim, because my anxiety had turned into a wildfire that I just couldn't control with meditation or anything, any of my other tools. I was on the medication for about a week and a half. Didn't stay on it long, so I didn't want to get stuck on it. I know people who are stuck on it. They come off it, they flip right out. I'm like, I can't do that. I just needed it to slow down for a minute, enough for me to get my foot in the door, do some research, and start finding some techniques to actually start to retrain my mind. That's what you want to do. You want to retrain your mind. You want to retrain your being. You don't just want to take tablets and not look at the core problem. You know what I mean? The car's got rust on it. You don't want to keep just spraying over the top of it. You want to stop, dig the rust out. Then you end up with a nice exterior, a good result. So the medication stopped everything enough for me to get my foot in the door and start to do some research into how I could work on some of these things that had built up and they were operating in my subconscious mind. Self-forgiveness for the choices I'd already made, that was the hardest one for me. Very hard on myself. Self-forgiveness, and this I haven't mastered all this, and I'm still working through this. And anyone who's working through similar things, you have my respect and my sympathy if you're struggling under the weight of it. But there's always a way out. You just decide you're going to make a way out, and you're not going to stay stuck under the weight of it. Forgiving myself for past choices, I'm still working on that. Starting to alchemically shift fear of the future over to faith in the future, because they're both on the same scale. Fear is at one end of the scale, faith, positivity are at the other end. They're the same thing, the only difference is degrees. Okay? So literally starting, like I said before, if you can make a negative choice based off something that's not even happening in the here and now, and you don't need physical evidence to make that choice, then by all reasons, you can make the same choice to be positive. You don't need evidence. You've already shown to yourself you don't need evidence to make these constant choices and projections about how the future's going to be. So start to recognize that point that out to yourself and start to flick that switch the other way. The other thing I had to do, I didn't have to do, but for the process of me purging and healing, I've been someone who's run my own businesses and been entrepreneurial in the past. By entrepreneurial, I mean my businesses are reflections of my own ideas, my own creativity. It's an important thing to me. But if you're going to be any kind of entrepreneur, you obviously need to have a relative degree of strength and belief in yourself. You know, I have something to offer. I don't just want to be a cog in someone else's machine. So clearly I've been lacking this what we've talked about has brought me to a place where I have been struggling with belief in myself. So I had to pause everything I had on the plate. That included my new business venture that I'd already poured money into, that I deemed to be conceived from a reactive place of fear. It was a hasty, fear-based decision to do what I was doing and where I was doing it. Now, I could have turned that around on the fly, but with where I was at, I definitely found that was going to be, I needed to make it as easy as I could on myself, because I had some deep reconditioning, some deep rewiring to be done. So I paused everything, got everything off my plate that was overwhelming me, and went, all right, my number one job right now is just to rewire myself without too much external pressure. Applied for jobs working for someone else, which is something I haven't done in like 20 years, which was confronting another fear too, but that's good. It'll give me a place for a while where I don't have to carry the pressure of doing my own thing while I work on myself, because the whole point of this human experiment, as I call it, is getting to a place where you realize you're responsible for it. You've made such a mess with your, however it's been for you, if you can relate to this. For me, it's been reactive, fear-based choices over a number of years. There's just been a steadily declining downward spiral until I got to the point where I constantly was trying to fix that by making mental choices on the fly, reaching out with my hands into the material world, trying to make things happen. And I do know better than this. I've experienced a different way in the past. But you get into fight or flight mode, you get into survival mode, and this is how you start to act. And it just gets harder and harder, and it gets thicker and thicker around you. So I finally made the choice. You go, okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to drop everything. I'm going to get a job, working for someone else, which I'm about to start soon. But from here on in, looking at where I've gotten to, I'm going to adopt the approach that if I change everything on the inside, if I look at what I've been avoiding for quite some time, if I do everything on the inside first and stop doing everything on the outside, what will happen? And I've been trying to do everything on the outside for longer than 4 years, 5, 6 years. It's exhausting. It hasn't led anywhere good. So I got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So I'm going to wrap this up soon because I've been going for ages, but the next time I chat, it's going to be on methods that I'm using to actually turn around the situation that I've been describing to you. And this will be, I've had to sort of bring it up to speed on how I got to where I am, what needs to change and why it needs to change. I do want to focus on solutions. That's what I'm trying to do within myself. So I've kind of outlined now, you know, some of the things I've been utilizing that are operating within me that have been negatives and working against myself, and brought me to the point where I needed to do something about it, why I made the choices I did as far as my actions moving forward. And the next time I log in, it'll be to talk about techniques that I've discovered, how I'm helping to rewire myself subconsciously, how I'm fighting the battle of the mind, power of positivity, the importance of making positive choices over negative choices, and all of it starting on the inside before it proceeds to make its way into the outside. How are you? So yeah, anyway, it's been a bit of a longer one this morning. I just wanted to talk about fear and how easily it just wraps itself up in the choices we make. You know, even little ways like, you know, your partner says to you, I'm going shopping, do you want to come? Or there's a family function on, do you want to come? When you decide that you don't want to experience something ahead of time because you've already decided that it's going to be something you don't like, you're afraid that you're going to be right, and so you make the choice to remain still, stagnant, and in inertia. It's the subtlest things. But when you actually really honestly look within and start to go, okay, if I remove terror as I've been conditioned to, or external threats as I've been conditioned to experience fear and recognize fear from the equation, and start to look at how many different faces fear has and how that affects me in my daily life, how bad can it get, all the way down to full-blown anxiety. Again, you have my respect, my condolences if you're someone who's living with anxiety. As I go on through some of the techniques and things that I'm discovering, maybe if that's you, it might find something that can send you down a path that could help you, or maybe it's just good to know that you're not alone. So yeah, next video I'll touch on more directly on some of the techniques that I'm using, how I'm feeling, how that's turning me around on the inside, because I'm feeling a lot better than I was feeling 4 weeks ago. Like 4 weeks ago I was in the grip, and now I'm actually starting to feel really different on the inside. So it's only a matter of time till that starts to get reflected in the outside world around me. Anyway, this has been this entry in my human experiment, day 13 or 14. After grinding to a halt, having a meltdown, going, okay, what are we going to do about this? I'm doing this as much for myself, just to keep track of it, so I can look back in a couple of years and go, man, look how much things have changed. But the fact that, you know, a few people have looked at this and some people might get something from this is actually really cool too. So if you are watching, thanks for watching, thanks for putting up with the ramble. I'll be back with some positive techniques on the next entry to how I'm making changes within myself and sticking to the good path. Take care. Bye.